Excellent. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So I hope today will be my aim is that this should be the last share on what we're calling Neo-Aristotle Platonism, the Rambam's composite, or not just the Rambam, the Jewish by Arab encounter with Greek philosophy. And I just want to very briefly revisit the concept of the forms, which we dealt with last week, and it is a very challenging idea, but exceptionally profound and a completely different way of thinking about things. And I just want to contextualize it because I was asked afterwards to sort of contextualize things a little bit. It starts off with a classic sort of philosophical question. Plato starts it off with a classic philosophical question. He presents this as Socrates. Again, we don't know how much is Plato, how much is Socrates. Socrates is his great teacher, his great rabbi. And we don't really have that much directly from Socrates. We've got various students of Socrates presenting his ideas, and Plato, the most prominent of those. And they start off asking a very classic Greek question, which is what's the meaning of a general term? So this can be something clearly conceptual, like justice or truth or beauty, and it could be something like a table. Define a table. What makes a table into a table? At what point does a table become a chair, and so on? And again, like many Greek thinkers, he criticizes those who try to define things just by example. You're missing the point if you try and define things by example. You somehow have to capture the essence of the idea and the quality shared by all examples. And from that, he comes to this idea that whilst the material world is constantly changing, and a physical table can come and go, and indeed a physical example of beauty or justice can come and go, and you can have multiple tables which all have different qualities. They exist in different times and different places and are made of different materials. One's metal, one's stone, one's wood, one has 4 legs, one has 3 legs. Nonetheless, there's some essential quality that they all share in common. And that's where he comes to this concept of the world, the theory of forms, that you have this unchanging world, which is the concept or the form that lies behind it. And then you have the less interesting, boring physical manifestation of this, which just happens to be how it happens to be in this, the physical form that it happens to have clothed itself in. But it isn't the core concept or form that lies behind it. So this is the theory of the forms, this idea that there's some sort of reality, you can call it almost a metaphysical reality behind concepts. And this is not an overtly spiritual idea. You don't need to be a believer in God or religion to understand this idea. It's a way of thinking about concepts and asking yourself, where do concepts exist? They don't just exist in the human mind. Even if there were no humans, there would still be a concept of the number 4. So surely it would still be true, mathematical logic, A equals B and B equals C, without humans having to think about it. Surely, even if no humans existed, but there were cats roaming Earth, there would still be a concept of cat. So these ideas have some sort of independent existence that we humans discover and encounter, but we don't create. And from that, then Plato emerges into this idea that we humans, in a sense, exist in 2 realms or 2 planes. We are physical beings that can only ever encounter a physical cat or a physical table, or even an actual example of justice. There is no, we'll never meet a real circle. A perfect circle doesn't exist in the universe. However, the concept of circle or the concept of a point or the concept of a straight line is there irrespective of humans. And even though we can only see, remember his mashal, his analogy of the parable of the man, the individual chained in the cave, who can only ever see the projector, the back of the cave, and the light shining forward from outside. Even though we can only ever see the shadows of concepts, we can only ever encounter these pale physical things. But behind that lies a greater reality that our minds can encounter. So this. You don't need to be religious or a believer to understand this, but certainly you can understand why Jewish thinkers, Jewish philosophers found this vocabulary and this way of thinking very useful in moving into the realm of spirituality, because suddenly you have a picture of human beings, whilst our feet walk earth, our minds are in the heavens, our minds exist in this world of ideas, and it gives us a whole vocabulary to think about spirituality. The soul is this mind that wanders an eternal type of universe, forms have something eternal to them, different to the mundane physical world. And you can even then begin thinking about minds which are not embodied, which are minds which are removed from physical body. Sorry, you can even have minds which are removed from physical bodies, which are the seichel nivdal, the detached consciousnesses of the angelic existence. So suddenly we have a whole sort of vocabulary that we can think about spiritual ideas, which we wouldn't have had were it not for these sort of this sort of vocabulary that was arrived at via Plato. So that's just a reminder of perhaps the most bold and exciting and interesting, at least to me, of Plato's ideas. Plato thinks, again, Aristotle, the student of Plato to some degree, but then becomes an independent thinker, thinks this is all nonsense. Concepts should only be thought of as categories. They're just ways of categorizing things. They don't represent any real, any reality behind them. But Plato's ideas remain profoundly influential. Plato thinks there's such a thing as a soul. In a way, this emerges from his previous idea. He thinks that the soul gives life. He believes in the immortality of the soul. Again, if there's a realm in which we have minds and reasoning and life that exists beyond the merely physical, then the soul you can conceive of as having some independent existence. Aristotle thinks this is a mistake. He thinks the soul is just in a sense the collection of we're not made up of soul and body. It's a mistake to think about it. The soul isn't a part of an individual that somehow is separate from the degrading and ever decomposing body. It simply refers to the various functions of the physical body, and we shouldn't think of it as something separate. However, Aristotle does think that the intellect has an independent existence, and in some respects, the Rambam follows that, and to some way thinks that the Jewish concept of an neshama or soul is equivalent to the concept of consciousness and intellect. Plato also has a very interesting idea, which is somewhat reminiscent of the Chazal about the fetus in the womb learning the whole Torah before it's born. And Plato thinks that the only reason why we can be conceptual beings who can think in the idea in the world of forms is because, in a sense, we are recollecting forms. There's recollection going on rather than creating them. So Plato thinks that on some level, since we are conceptual beings who exist in the world of concepts, we've already encountered these ideas previously and are merely rediscovering them. But in a sense, these ideas that we already know, were we not to know them, how would we discover them? How would we understand them? In other words, there has to be something within us that's capable of thinking conceptually and living in a conceptual world that somehow is pre-programmed or pre-implanted in us. I'm no expert on linguistics and theories of language and Noam Chomsky and these sorts of people, but there are modern philosophies around these sorts of ideas. To what degree are we pre-programmed with an innate sense of concepts and an innate sense of languages? The big problem, in a sense, in child development, which is both a question of psychology but also a question of philosophy, is how do we claw our way out of non-consciousness into consciousness? A child, within a very short amount of time, begins conceptualizing the universe and eventually learns how to label these concepts with a particular convenience arrangements of syllables, which is what we call talking. The less interesting part of this convenience arrangements of syllables, I mean, it's quite important to us humans, but the more important part is how do we begin categorizing and conceptualizing? And if there's nothing within the child, if the child is a completely blank slate, in which there's nothing conceptual or nothing within it, how can this sort of emerge? Where does it come from? This remains a problem in sort of philosophically and a problem in psychology. And Plato again thinks that it must be because there's some innate qualities to the soul in which, in some level, it already pre-exists pre its birth. So again, I don't want this all to come across as super mystical. It feeds very nice into Jewish mysticism, but I want you to understand there's philosophical ideas here. Plato's not heir to a mystical tradition. He's arriving at this from his own thinking, from his own reasoning, and he's fascinated by many things. For our purpose, he's fascinated by us humans, how conceptual we are. He starts off like many other Greek philosophers with trying to think about concepts and how to define the essence of things. But he points out to us that when we talk about the essence of something or the shared quality of something, is that merely messy thinking? Or do we really mean that there's a quality there which somehow exists independently of the table? Is there a tableness that exists, or a concept of justice that exists, or a concept of beauty that exists? When I say this is beautiful, what do I mean? I mean it has the quality of beauty. Where is this quality of beauty? When I say this is just, and this is unjust, that means this has the quality of justice and this doesn't have the quality of justice. Or even when I say something really mediocre and boring, like this is a table, where is this a table that exists? So he's calling on us, and we again, I want you to understand, whether you end up, I'm not trying to convince you to become Neo-Platonists here, but whether you end up in Neo-Platonism or not, you can't duck the question that we engage in messy thought when we talk about concepts and qualities, and we never stop, I'll come to a moment, we never stop and think, where is this quality? What do we mean when we say this is just, or this is beautiful, or this is a table? Is there something called a quality of tableness or a quality of justice? And if there is, wow, that means there's in a sense immortal forms which are above time and space. In the same way as I think we would all agree that there is a concept of a circle, whether humans happen to exist or not. If you have at least if you have a spatial universe, there's a concept of a circle. And even though there never will be a perfect circle, an absolutely perfect circle in existence, nonetheless, the concept circle is one that exists. Is there also a concept of beauty? If humans never existed, could there still be a concept of beauty? And why not? If we mean something real by saying there's beauty. And once you come onto that, then which part of ourselves is navigating that realm? Which part of ourselves is encountering beauty and tableness and perfect circles? Well, if there's a part of ourselves that's connecting to it, then surely there's a part of ourselves, in a sense, that lives in that eternal space of concepts. We are also concepts. We are conceptual beings. In which case, we have that which is eternal about us. In which case, there's a part of us that exists pre our birth, and there's a part of us that continues to exist post our death. And he uses the language of reincarnation. Most thinkers don't think he means Gilgal or reincarnation, that I'm reincarnated into a tree, onto someone else. What he means is more akin to what we would say is the neshama exists pre-birth and the neshama exists post-death, and there's qualities that the neshama has of being a conceptual being, even pre its creation. So these are profound ideas. They are philosophical ideas, but again, ones which lend themselves very conveniently to Jewish thought and give us a whole spiritual vocabulary that we wouldn't have had otherwise. You can almost translate, when we talk about spiritual, and I say you are a spiritual person, or you should be spiritual, or you have a soul, all these sorts of mysterious terms that we use and we don't really know what they mean. It's convenient to use the language of, and the Rambam did this for us in a sense, in the Moreh Nevuchim, of translating these concepts into Greek terminology. And he says, when I talk about you being spiritual, I'm saying be removed from your physical manifestation, being, live in the realm of forms, live in a non-physical existence, be true to your deeper essence, which is that of recognize you're merely chains to physicality, like this child's chains and only seeing the shadows walking on the, reflecting on the back of the cave, but behind that you can understand there's a reality that lies behind this. So the Rambam doesn't anywhere, to the best of my knowledge, actually quote the parable of the cave, but so much of Neo-Platonism is sort of informed by that way of thinking. Sorry, Neil.
So I understand the difference between forms.
Yeah.
Just before Plato, the mental picture for a bundle puzzle when discussing what Torah concept is.
No, but your question is very, very helpful because Kadoshim to you is a lovely example. So let me spell this out. Like many philosophical ideas, once spelt out, it's difficult to determine what people thought beforehand. And maybe we didn't sort of even categorize things or think about these things in these terms. Plato was mechadesh, that when we talk about qualities, we should think of that as meaning something real. There's been messy thinking going on before. I'm to leave Judaism out of this for a few minutes. There's been messy thinking going on before, and we actually do mean a type of metaphysical reality behind it. When you say, people before Plato were still saying things like this is just and this is unjust, this is beautiful and this is ugly. They were still talking about circles and maths and geometry. No one stopped though and sort of asked themselves, do I mean something real by that? What do I mean when I'm saying the quality, or no one that we know of? It wasn't debated, discussed. When I talk about the quality of something, or maybe it was, at least it's come to the Western tradition via Plato. When I say something has the quality of something, do I mean there's something real about it, Plato, or is it Aristotle? No, you've gone down a messy path of messy thinking here. All you mean is it's a convenient label and category for us to talk about. Or even if categories represent something fundamental, they don't have an independent reality, independent of form. The truth is, I have trouble explaining Aristotle's viewpoint on this. In other words, I'm so deep down the wormhole of Neo-Platonism in a sense that I don't quite know how to phrase this. Does Aristotle really mean this is a human creation? No. If I group things together, if I say there's such thing as a perfect circle, or even if I say chairs, tables, and stools are all subcategories of something called furniture, in some sense there must be, I mean something when I'm saying it's furniture. There is some abstract concept called furniture, and in what way does that not have an independent existence of any particular object? But Aristotle thinks this is merely categorization. Plato thinks this is representing some underlying forms of conceptual reality that has an independent existence. What did Jews think about these things before? Probably more on the side of independent existence. When you say be holy, be Kaddish, probably, because your example is a lovely one, Kadoshim to you, they feel there's something called Kedusha, 100%. No one categorized that in sort of philosophical language. The Rambam and the Jewish thinkers that followed found Plato a convenient vocabulary or way of talking about metaphysical concepts. If someone says to you, and this is actually quite important in the modern world, because we were just talking about Dawkins before, that many students, teenagers, young adults who have grown up very much in the sort of post-neo-atheist world, their basic problem with Judaism is not a philosophical question. It's that the whole idea just sounds very spooky and weird. Souls and gods and spiritual existence and world to come, and in the shamas before you're born and after you're born, where are all these things? I'm a materialist. I just believe in that which is physically existent. Again, there's poor philosophy going on over here. They call this philosophy, in philosophy called this reductionism, or they're like, Plato's pointing out to us that we have respectable philosophical language to talk about these things in, and that even you can choose not to be a Marmin. Not everyone has to be a Marmin. In many ways, Plato is not a Marmin. We'll see in a little bit of time. But you can't evade recognizing that you at least have to grapple with the idea that we live in a world that is more than just that which is material. And one way of thinking about that is this language of Neo-Platonism. By the way, in some ways, and Plato is aware of this, if you go back to Greek's pagan past, and in many ways, Plato is not a pagan. If you go back to Greece's pagan past, when we talk about the god of love and the god of justice and the god of truth, you're sort of also fumbling around these ideas. You're feeling around these ideas that there is something there called justice and truth and love. So the Greeks, even in their pagan incarnation, are a little bit more conceptual than other versions of paganism. It's not just the god of fire, the god of storms, or the god of mountains, or the god of this olive grove. They've conceptualized, and they're talking about the god of love and the god of truth. So they're already sort of feeling this idea that there's a reality which is abstract, which needs its own gods. It's not just an olive grove that needs a god, it's also love that needs a god. So in saying that, you're also sort of feeling around the idea that there's something called love out there, and something called truth out there, which has some form of independent existence. So out of this whole amazing Greek culture of which Plato is born into, emerges this amazing idea in which Plato says concepts need more thought than we often give them. Again, I'm not trying to convince everyone in sort of 45 minutes on a Sunday morning of the truth or untruth of Plato's position. I'm simply trying to say there's a problem there that we often don't grapple with, that we need to think about. And if you're interested in these, if ideas are important to you, and certainly as a Marmin, we are all likely to encounter people that say, I think most of the time when you deal with someone whose intuition is profoundly materialistic and atheistic, and you sort of engage in classic arguments about belief in God, they walk out of the room saying, okay, I don't quite know how to answer your questions about belief in God. I hear like you're a clever guy, and you're sort of, I don't at this moment in time have any particular answer, but the idea is so fantastically revolting and so ridiculous in its core, I can't take it seriously. Again, if we sat here in this room and I proved to you some wacky conspiracy theory, or in the spaghetti monster or whatever, and you'd leave the room and say, okay, Zobin's a clever guy, I don't quite know how to answer his question, but I know what he's saying is ridiculous. You have an inner knowledge that this is just balmy, and I don't quite know how to respond to him, but I know if I met someone who could respond, they would respond, and I know if I thought about it long enough, I would respond, because this is just crazy. So to many of us in the 21st century, the idea of God is just weird. It's just people walking around who believe in ghosts. It's just balmy. And that's what religion is to those who are very deeply down a sort of path of scientific materialism. And again, these sorts of ideas, to me, I'm not saying I speak about Neo-Platonism to sixth formers. I don't, but I definitely try and bring in these ideas in conversation, because there is something there that we're messily thinking about. We're not really grappling with, which is what do we mean when we talk about these concepts? And to me anyway, Neo-Platonism is an important idea because of that. I want to go on from the parable of the cave, because I would like to just run through 5 other Platonic ideas that the Rambam was fascinated by, and also a little bit more about Aristotle. Yeah.
Yeah, and taking showing how exactly as you put it, that these concepts basically aren't about without taking them.
Yeah, I think so. I think that and the purpose of this year is not to talk too much about paganism, but again, pagans aren't fools. And what does it mean to talk about a God of love and a God of justice? In a sense, if these ideas exist and are eternal, then these are concepts, forms above time and space that have eternal existence. They're beginning to sound like gods. It's not far off that idea. And again, the Rambam, who's interested in, we talk about Raphael or Michael, or we have ideas of angels, the angel of healing or the angel of death, or the Rambam believes that angels are not, again, the Rambam, in some respects is a mystic, in some respects a philosopher. It's not clear what the difference is as you get deeper into sort of Neoplatonism, in a way that the concepts merge. But the Rambam believes that when the Torah talks about a malach, an angel, it can mean ois malach of ruchos, it's a pasuk, that the ruach, the winds, is an angel of Hashem. Angel just means a messenger of Hashem. But he also thinks of malachim as abstract intellects, as cholim nivdolim, as conceptual reasoning consciousnesses that are disembodied, and therefore again you're getting to a sort of overlap of ideas. We don't chas v'shalom ascribe. We don't think these beings of gods. We think these are also ultimately creatures of God. But you can see why they have some existence in their own right. Let me move this on maybe to another really important discussion, and you'll see what I mean by this. If I'm arguing that a perfect circle, has an absolute existence in a sense, or the number 4 has an absolute existence in a sense, because a perfect circle would exist whether humans exist or don't exist, or even the concept of cat would exist whether there happen to be humans wandering planet Earth or not. Does this lend itself to the concept of an eternal universe? So many Greek thinkers, and in this, the majority of Greek tradition, and certainly Plato and Aristotle and so on, believed in an eternal universe. And again, the reason they believed in an eternal universe was both empirical and philosophical. Empirically, they said, you see, nothing changes. You see the stars follow a perfectly regular pattern. And we can look at the cycle of the stars 1,000 years ago, and we can look at them today, and they're unchanging. And therefore, we live in a empirically unchanging universe. And we see species are unchanging. A parent gives birth to a child, which will give birth to a grandchild and a great grandchild, and so on. And therefore, you've got this chain, this causal chain, which goes on forever. Why should we scientifically speculate a start to this? I mean, why should a sheep suddenly have come into existence? And why should a star suddenly have popped into existence? They are just there. They just exist forever. And if we ask ourselves, what's the cause of a sheep? The answer is a mother sheep. And what's the cause of that? A grandmother sheep. So why would we look for deeper explanations? Or why would we look for a time and a space in which existence came into being? So the Greeks adopted empirically a concept, many of the Greeks, a concept of an eternal, the best of the Greeks, meaning the Platonic, Aristotelian, Socratic tradition that we have, adopts the stance of an eternal universe empirically. And also conceptually, this is an appealing idea. If there's a concept cat, then cats always existed. If there's a concept circle, then space and time, spatial existence always existed. If there's a concept fall, then there always was fall. This idea that there wasn't that is ridiculous. Now, this is a very powerful idea, and obviously here we come into conflict between the Jewish way of thinking and the Greek way of thinking, and the Rambam deals with this in his Nevuchim, and he is conscious that in this respect he's profoundly not going along with the line of the Greek thinkers, and he says the following, the Rambam in his Nevuchim, and a very, very important comment philosophically. He says that philosophically the Greeks could be right. It's a reasonable, viable model. We live in an unchanging universe, and therefore, presumably, it just went on and on and on and on forever. However, there's nothing philosophically problematic with the idea that existence came into being at some juncture, or more profoundly, time and space came into existence at some juncture. And the Rambam is very aware of the idea that even time could have come into existence. And you can't ask, we've dealt with this previously, you can't ask what happened before creation because there wasn't even a concept of time. You can't ask what's outside creation because there isn't even a concept of outside. So the Rambam simply says we have two tenable philosophical positions. He says, I respect the Greeks and hear where they're coming from, and what they're saying is reasonable. However, there's nothing unreasonable about the alternative. There's no proof for it. You could say, things just stretch back eternally in an infinite chain. But it could equally be that at some point this came into existence. There was a mother sheep created at some point in time. Time and space did come into existence. I can even see that in a sense empirically, why say that? Why innovate the idea that things come into existence in time and space? If what would cause you to say that? If you see an eternal chain stretching back in time, why would you speculate that at some point it came into time and space? Good question, but there's nothing philosophically untenable about saying that. And therefore, says the Rambam, since I have the Torah telling me that indeed creation occurred, and I have no philosophical problem with it, I'm going to go with that. If there was a knockout blow, a clear philosophical argument against it, I'd have to deal with it. But I don't need to deal with it. I'm a believer in the Torah. I'm simply trying to guide the student, Moreh Nevuchim, the perplexed student, who has become immersed in Greek philosophy and struggles with how that coincides with revelation, with creation, and so on. I'm demonstrating that the Greeks, in many ways, are not the enemy. They give us a very convenient way of thinking about life. They've brought clear reasoning into existence. That's fantastic. And there's nothing, and they have other ideas that we don't agree with. They're sound thinkers, the Greeks. I can see why they believe in an eternal universe, but I also can see why they don't believe in an eternal, why you don't have to believe in an eternal universe. There's nothing illogical or unphilosophically sound about that. And therefore, we have Torah that teaches us that the creation came into existence. Interestingly, the Rambam does hint at where he would go if there was a philosophical proof. And the Rambam says, I want you to understand, I don't have a problem. Were there to be a philosophical proof against this, I would deal with it. Because when I have philosophically provable things which counter Pshutoi Shel Mikra, I'm happy to conceptualize the pasuk. But there's nothing here that draws me to do that. Where does the Rambam conceptualize pasukim philosophically? His famous anthropomorphisms. Yad Hashem, right? We've become very used to this. None of us are bothered by this. And the pasuk says God has a Yad Chazaka, a strong hand, a Zroy Natu, an outstretched arm. The pasuk says God has emotions like Haron Apo, his anger burns. None of us are bothered by this because we live in a thoroughly post-Rambam world, in which we understand that this is an expression, a way of saying things. So Rambam says, like, I'm willing to conceptualize psukim when there's a reason to do so, but I see no reason to do so here. Now, there's so much to unpick in this. It's almost overwhelming. This is such a tight, so many layers to this. And I just want to make an attempt to try and connect the dots to many other things that we've spoken about previously, and simply signpost to the online shiurim on all these, and give a call for chazara, a revision for those who, or looking at these for those who didn't. So it's a quick plug for other times we've dealt with these things. But I just want to sort of join the dots in thinking of this. So let's unpick this one by one. The first thing is the Greeks believe in an eternal universe. It just goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on forever. The modern mind, by the way, boggles at this. We find this very difficult to understand. But I want you to understand that till early 1900s, this is the dominant way of thought. All those who are scientifically minded and philosophically minded basically have such a conception. To the degree that famously, as Einstein, it becomes clear from his theories that we live in an expanding universe, he rejects this because it can't be we live in an expanding universe. We clearly don't. We see that it's stable. I mean, it's almost the dogma, the prime example of this Newtonian clockwork universe is the complete stability of time and space, and this idea that it's an expanding universe. The mind revolts at such an idea. Einstein later fudges this in one of the errors of his life. He describes this as perhaps his biggest mistake ever. It becomes accepted that a consequence of Einsteinian physics is an expanding universe, and by the 1960s, this is provable, redshift and Hubble and other things like that. Okay, now let's just understand what we mean by an Einsteinian, by an expanding universe. We are taught, sort of in year 7, when you're taught this in physics, and I've said this before, to picture a balloon expanding and expanding, right? And you've got stars painted on the balloon and it expands and expands. That analogy is correct. The problem with the analogy is that when we picture it, we picture a balloon expanding into the classroom. Here, we're not talking about a balloon expanding into a classroom. We're talking about space itself expanding. It's not just the stars are rushing out, it's space itself is expanding. Expanding into what? There is no what. It's not expanding in space because there is no space outside it. You can't even talk about outside it because there is no outside. So you have a breakdown in vocabulary, which is very similar to really the Rambam's point in Nevuchim, that there's a breakdown in vocabulary. As soon as you try and talk about, this is the via negativa, the negative part of the Rambam, as soon as you try and step out of existence, you can only talk about negatively. You can't talk positively. You can't talk about expanding into. You can say there's nothing there, but nothing is a negative word, no thing. Even infinite, the Rambam understands, is a negative word, not a positive word. So the Greek saying things go on and on and on and on is a negative word in the sense it's non-finite. We don't have a word to capture something that is infinite. And this is the famous point of the Rambam. So this is in terms of space. There's a similar thing in terms of time. One of the consequences of an expanding universe is if you turn the video backwards, if you play it backwards, and others, we speculate about, okay, we're here, we're expanding in that direction, but that means that earlier in time it was smaller and smaller and smaller, is you get to the possibility, at least, which is the consensus of scientific thinking at the moment, that at some point in time and space it came into existence. So what happens before that point it came into existence? You can't even use the word before, like you can't use the word outside. There is no before because there is no time. So time itself is a creation, is something that comes into existence. So when we want to ask what preceded our existence, in a sense, we leave the realm of science and vocabulary breaks down, and you can even talk in negative sense because you can't use the word precede because there is no precede. You can't use the word outside because there is no outside. And this is the deeper level of why the Greeks hated this idea, because it's profoundly, in a sense, unscientific, or it's not a problem that it's unscientific. In the 21st century, we think that when something is unscientific, it means it's untrue. Unscientific doesn't mean it's untrue. It simply means it's not within the realm of what science deals with. But science has got, as of 2024, this is the consensus of where science has got itself to. Now, I'm not arguing for Judaism based upon where science happens to be in 2024. I'm simply pointing out that we are living in a good time as believers, because that is where science has got itself to. And the Rambam, again, in his Nevuchim, spells this out. He says, time itself is a creation. Time itself comes into existence. So in these senses, the Rambam is well ahead of his time, or put it differently, he's relying on Torah when he's saying these things. But again, the Rambam is bringing a clarity of thought to Torah, and he's spelling out the consequences of a non-Greek worldview, in which, in this respect, not like Aristotle, not like Plato, a universe which is not eternal, but comes into existence at some point in time and space, where even that is borrowed language. It's really time and space comes into existence. So this is sort of one point to make in a disagreement between Greek thinkers, not just Aristotle and Plato, many others, that believe in an eternal universe. And the Rambam says, I don't have a philosophical problem with it. It could be true, but there's no proof for it, and therefore it's not something I need to address in my Nevuchim. I'm happy to take Torah on face value. Why not? There's no problem over there. The Rambam, by the way, does buy into the correctness of the Greek view that the universe that has now been created is entirely stable. And we now know this is scientifically wrong. So interestingly, even the empirical basis of the Greek view has been debunked in a very significant way. Species become extinct. The Rambam thinks they can't become extinct because there's something eternal about them. If you believe in evolution, species evolve. They come from non-species existence. It's not true that a mother sheep, that if you go back in time, there's an eternal chain of sheep, because there's tiny little changes that creep in, till at some point or other you arrive at something that's very different to a sheep. It's a fish or a single-celled amoeba and so on. So we don't believe in the eternity of species. We don't even believe in the eternity of the stars. The planetary systems are slightly changing constantly. The stars are slowly dying. So the Greeks who looked at the star systems said, look, this is eternal and unchanging, is simply because they were taking too small a sample size, right? You may think that 1,000 years is a great sample size. It is a great sample size for many other things, but on the scale of current thought, which is we're living in a universe of 13.8 odd billion years, 1,000 years is far too a sample size. And if you look with a big enough picture, you will understand this. So again, I'm not taking sides in 2024 scientific debates and attaching this to any particular scientific view. I'm just saying that as we currently understand things, the empirical basis of Greek thought was also wrong. But just for the sake of intellectual honesty, in this respect, the Rambam went with the Greeks. He believed that post-creation, species are eternal, the star system is eternal. In his Mishnah Torah, he gives a proof, a semi-proof, a quasi-proof for the all-powerfulness of God, which is built on the eternity of the planetary systems and the like. And this is stuff that we don't go with anymore. No one thinks is correct anymore. So, but in the core issue of eternity of the universe, the Rambam spells out the Jewish view, and in that respect, we're in very comfortable territory in 2024. No. The Greek assumption that the universe is eternal was built on empirical data, which we believe is wrong, that species are unchanging, on empirical data that we think is wrong, that the star systems are this eternal mechanism, and on a philosophical view that the most philosophically sound model is an eternal universe. And we don't think philosophically they're correct in that respect. We think they made a mistake. And we also think that we happen to exist in a universe in which time and space came into existence, and we can't think, as Stephen Hawking famously says, you can't ask what happened before the Big Bang, because it's like asking what's north of the North Pole. So in every respect, we think the Greeks got this wrong, and in every respect, in this sense, we think we Jews got that right. That's what I'm saying. Now, again, just for the sake of intellectual honesty, there are scientists that think that even with the Big Bang Theory, we live in an eternity and expanding, contracting universe. And there's a bunch of stuff out there. I'm not here trying to claim that, 2024 science says X, therefore be from. And that's not my argument. I'm simply saying that at least as far as we are currently up to, we think that type of eternal universe model is profoundly debunked. And the Rambam simply said, both are sound theories, therefore I choose to go with the Torah. Not choose, he was a Maimon. The Torah says this, I don't have a problem with this. Dear student who I'm addressing, Mr. Novel, confused, perplexed person who's trying to grapple with revelation versus reason, you should know in this area there's no problem. This happens to be the view the Greeks have said, but in this respect, in many other things, the Greeks adopted a philosophical stance that we can't argue with. In this respect, they're adopting a position which you can philosophically view an alternative, and therefore I don't see any problem with going with revelation and the Torah's perspective on it. So yeah, Darren. To the best of my, the question is whether Rambam believes in the year 6000 in Rambam's progression. To the best of my knowledge, he doesn't bring that. No. Yeah. The Rambam, by the way, has this in other respects. Olam Kimin Hogo Nohig. We learned this when we looked at the era of Mashiach and Tchias HaMesim. The Rambam said nature continues, it doesn't change. Don't think that the Messianic era is nature changing. When Chazal say that cakes will grow on trees, they simply mean a metaphor that our panos will become easy. There won't be, now cakes are the example of things that take 11 malachas to produce. It's intensely labor intensive. Things will become very easy. But Olam Kimin Hogo Nohig, nature continues and so on. So this ties into a lot of the thoughts of the Rambam. But the Rambam believes in gods of history. It's not that philosophically he has a problem with the concept of era of Mashiach and things like that, but he also believes that very fundamental to nature is continuity. And this feeds into, again, just to connect the dots with other things we've discussed, the Rambam's views around Hashgacha Pratis, the Rambam grappling with miracles. We spoke about the Rambam around miracles, I think, and he gives a number of different ways of thinking about miracles. He perhaps, in one of the few areas where we have evidence of him so doing, he changes his mind between what he says in his commentary on the Mishnayos and what he says in his Moreh Nevuchim. But you can see why, if you believe in an unchanging universe, you have to think more carefully about what miracles means and things like that. But I'm not trying to cover the whole of Jewish or Maimonidean philosophy in one go. Yes?
One clarification. Ask whether the internal universe can be reconciled with expanding.
In current scientific thinking, at least what we mean by the normal understanding of time and space, current thinking is that the expanding universe means a non-eternal universe. There's two wiggle room things in this. One is sort of multiverse stuff, that maybe there's a universe beyond the universe in a sense within, and that's the framework within which it operates. The second bit of wiggle room is, this is way beyond my mathematical ability, but I'm read, that if you crunch the data and you see it sort of shrinking back, it's possible it can sort of miss, and that if you can get back to an eternal universe again. In other words, who says that the maths works out that because if we're in an expanding universe, then if you turn the clock back, you're sort of shrinking it. Who says it gets to a crunch point at which it ends up as nothing, infinitesimally small, and you move beyond the singularity where maths breaks down because relativity contradicts with quantum mechanics, and you end up with beyond time and space. Maybe it sort of misses, and you get back to understanding the oscillating universe model and so on. Again, I'm not claiming to be a physicist or a philosopher or anything. I'm just sharing with you. Mainstream thinking at the moment is that we don't live in an eternal universe. You can begin wondering, we live in a universe with the rules of science. And at the moment, we're still grappling with trying to understand those rules of science. You could imagine physics departments don't want to run out of funding, right? So what do they do when they've got all the rules of science? This is a joke, obviously. You need to now begin asking yourself a deeper question, which is, what are the rules that make the rules of science? So in a sense, now you move into the realm of meta rules of science. So we've discovered, let's say, everything to know about science, if that's possible. Now, what are the rules about the rules of science? In other words, what makes the rules of science? Why are constants what they are? Why are the rules of science the way they are? And that would then begin, if you like, sort of beyond the universe. What's the framework within which the universe operates? The problem is, in a sense, you get back to the same classic Jewish argument for creation, which is, if you don't buy into this idea of an infinite causal chain, then you need to ask yourself, if everything is caused by something, which in turn is caused by something, if you don't go with the answer of an infinite chain, there has to be a first cause, a concept of a first cause. So even if you have meta laws within which laws of physics embody, you then have meta laws, because once the physics departments once they've uncovered the whole realm of meta laws, the laws that explain why the laws of science are, you now need to ask yourself another question, which is, and why are those meta laws in place? And you'll have to study meta laws. So we think that we're caught up in an infinite regress similar to that which the Greeks found themselves in. But again, this is very speculative stuff. Sorry, Andrew, you were waiting patiently.
I was just saying, even oscillating universe.
An oscillating universe certainly won't be an unchanging universe. The question is it an eternal universe? Or does its oscillation also wear down eventually? Again, this is stuff way beyond my mathematical ability, like infinitely, phenomenally beyond my mathematical ability. I'm just sharing with you what the current mainstream thinking is. I wouldn't be bothered as a Maimon if it turns out that scientific consensus switched towards an eternally oscillating universe. We just happen to be living, in a sense, in a golden age, Jewishly, because we can sort of a bit smartly say at the moment now, the Jewish picture turns out to have been, in this respect, much better than the Greek picture, which is no surprise because the creator of the universe told us stuff. Okay, so this is another area. Another area of that's important. I want to Yeah, I'm going to be ambitious and still try and finish off what I wanted to say today. I'm going to make another point about the eternal universe. That's important. And then I'm just going to scattergun and just share with you like 3 or 4 other topics that Plato and Aristotle dealt with that are important for our purposes. Does an eternal universe mean there's no God? And what would God's relationship be to an eternal universe? So this is a really important point. An eternal universe does not mean no God, and it doesn't even mean that we can't call God the first cause. So again, the way of labeling God first cause is Greek terminology. Again, in answer to Neil's point, it's not that Jews beforehand didn't think of God as the first cause. Of course, we thought of God as the first cause, but no one labeled it like that or thought of it in that terminology. That's why I gave this whole lengthy introduction about how once we have Greek terminology, we can't really escape from it. Of course, if God is the creator of the universe, the creator of the universe, but the sort of language of first cause. What the Rambam points out in his Nevuchim, and really this is the Greeks, Plato and Aristotle do believe in God. They believe in God. How can you talk about first cause if you believe in eternal universe? Says the Rambam, and he spells this out, and really this comes from the Greeks, that we think of first as temporal. Something that is first has to precede that which follows. Or we think of a cause as coming before the effect, in which case God has to be before creation, but he can't be before creation because creation is eternal. But first can mean a conceptual first. And then a way of thinking about this is an analogy of the spring. If I'm holding a spring down, I'm the cause of the spring remaining down, but it is concurrent with the spring remaining down. I'm not talking about the moment when I press the spring down, but now I'm in the position of holding the spring down. I'm the cause of it staying down but at the same time temporally concurrent with it staying down. So God can be the cause of creation, and yet it's possible that in the same way as God is eternal, creation is eternal, or the causation is eternal. So God is the cause of creation without having ever done an act of creation. This is why the Rambam says that were we to be able to prove an eternal universe, we would have to look at what that does, how that plays out in Yiddishkeit, but don't think that that means that you don't that God is out of the picture. And again, the Greeks taught us this. They understood this, that you can believe in an eternal God with an eternal creation, and God is the first cause in the sense of he's the first cause conceptually. He is at the head of the causal chain of existence, and yet creation is eternal. Again, this is not the Jewish view, and I don't want any of us to emerge from this as kofim, but that's a philosophical point that emerges from the Rambam. There's a machlokas between Aristotle and Plato whether this can work with a free-willed God. Is God of his own volition creating the universe or causing the universe, or is it sort of inevitable if it's eternal? We need not go into that because we anyway don't go with this model, but this did hit Jewish philosophy as a discussion about volition. We do believe in a God who freely wills creation into existence. Plato goes into very great depth, and Neo-Platonists particularly, of emanations, or what the sort of the shalshelet, the chain. If you have God as absolute existence, infinite, who's the first cause, can we say anything about the causal chain between this infinite God and finite creation? I hope we've discussed Kabbala before and things like that. This becomes a very significant topic in Kabbala. Spheres and emanations and causal chains of levels of creation and so on. Again, I'm not going to go into discussion of how even the vocabulary of Kabbala is molded by Greek thinking. Obviously, these ideas that Jewish mystics think about long before Greek philosophy, but the current language that these ideas are expressed in has been impacted again by Neo-Platonism. It's become too convenient a vocabulary to talk about that we can't avoid using that vocabulary. But just for those who are interested in these things, one of the central topics of Kabbala, not of the Rambam's thinking, but of Kabbala, and one needs to wonder how the Rambam would have dealt with this, is how does an infinite God interact with a finite universe? And Neo-Platonism develops a whole vocabulary to address this, and Jews again have their own pathway around this. Okay, I don't want any of us to emerge confused. So far, really, all we've covered is 2 ideas of the Greeks and Jews. The first is this idea of Plato, Aristotle, of forms and some sort of realm of forms, almost lending itself to metaphysics and spiritual existence. Second thing we've discussed is eternal universe. Greek view that we're in an eternal universe. Jewish view that we are in a universe that's in which space and time come into existence. The idea, the vocabulary of first cause, the idea that even if you're a Greek, you can believe in the concept of a first cause, but not temporal, but conceptual first cause, and concurrent in a sense in which the first cause is maintaining the universe. And then a problem, a philosophical problem, how does the finite interact with the infinite, and the concept of there being almost a chain of causality between the two, which Plato and Neo-Platonism addresses. And again, the language at least has impacted on how even Kabbalists, who come from a very different tradition, speak about these ideas. Let's briefly touch on some other Greek ideas, and then we will finish. Okay, I'm going to touch on a couple of other things simply because we've discussed them before. Greeks are very interested in ethics. Jews are very interested in ethics. Aristotle, in his he has two ethical works. He speaks there explicitly about the golden mean. The Rambam, in his Mishnah Torah, begins his development of ethics around this idea of the golden mean. If you are on an extreme of miserliness, you have a problem. You're too miserly. If you're on an extreme of generosity, you have a problem because you just give away all your wealth and you can't function. If you're on an extreme of inertia and inaction, then you're too lazy to function. But if you're on an extreme of impulsivity, then again, you're overactive. If you're on an extreme of modesty, you lack self-esteem and self-confidence, and you don't know your own abilities. If you're in the extreme of arrogance, you block out your ability to recognize value in others and to listen and hear from others. And if you need, again, and in many areas, the Rambam speaks about the golden mean. This is many civilizations came up with the idea of the golden mean. Many cultures are not a uniquely Greek idea, but the formulation the Rambam gives to this very much reflects the Greek thinkers, and he ties this into Valachta B'drachov, walking in the path of Hashem. And again, it's a Gemara. Mahu chanun afatahei chanun, just as Hashem is merciful or gracious, so you too should be gracious. Mahu rachum afatahei rachum, just like you're merciful, we should be merciful, and so on. A lot of discussion about how the Rambam puts these two ideas together. How does the concept of the golden mean, and how does Valachta B'drachov, us adopting the middles of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, coincide? Is this familiar to everyone? The concept of the golden mean is familiar, and the idea that we meant to mimic Hashem's behavior. Valachta B'drachov, we should walk in the way of God, just as He is. It's a Gemara. It's not a Rambam. Just as He is merciful, we should be merciful. Again, a Gemara concept. The Rambam thinks the two go together, and it's not entirely clear how he does that. Another bit of signposting. When we spoke about Jewish ethics, we spent a long time speaking about the Euthyphero dilemma or paradox, which very briefly, just to remind you, do Chazaron, listen to these recordings. They were good shiurim. They're worth listening to if you've forgotten this. The paradox that's asked. What do we mean when we talk about morals and religion? How do morals and religion go together? Does God create good? Is goodness a product of godliness? In which case, what made Him choose this to be good and this to be bad? If God chose, could murder be good and sustaining life be bad? Seems problematic. On the other hand, if good exists somehow outside God, then God is a slave to goodness. He's a slave to that which to the moral code. So is there a moral code outside God, in which case He's meshubed and bound to that? Or is God the creator of moral codes, in which case it seems to be arbitrary? And what does that mean? This dilemma, again, first posed in the name of Socrates by Plato. So again, just tying the dots, this is a dilemma that the Greeks spelt out first and most clearly. It's not that these ideas don't find thought in Chazal, they absolutely do, but the Greeks brought a vocabulary and a clarity of the paradox, the dilemma, to our attention. And again, in that series, we deal with it quite extensively, what the Jewish answer to that paradox would be. I finally want to just conclude by saying, for those who are interested in ideas, I want you to understand these are not just Sunday morning topics. They are so they weave their way so much through Jewish thinking in so many different ways, and unless one understands the philosophical base of these, one misses the point. So, for example, the Rishonim all grapple with the idea of Olam Kadmon. Now, Olam Kadmon, Kodem means before, an early universe or something like that. And in modern day non-trained philosophical Jewish discourse, people think this means, is the world 15 billion years old, or is the world 6,000 years old? And that's the grappling point. It's not. It means an eternal universe. That's what the Rishonim are talking about. And they're referencing these Greek ideas. the Rambam in the beginning of the Torah, the Perush of the Rambam on Chumash, the Perush of the Rambam after Rashi is perhaps the second most learned Perush of Torah and the bread and butter of Jewish theology in such a fundamental way. And he talks about the Hiyuli. Right, what is this Hiyuli? Again, it's an Aristotelian concept of a Platonic concept of a sort of matter that exists in this idea that somehow this eternal matter, formless matter, by the way, formless, choma, without forms, is somehow molded by the forms into the shape of the universe as we know it, and becomes the universe as we know it. So all I'm simply saying is that for those who are interested in these things, I don't think there's any mitzvah. Everyone has to be interested in this. For those who are interested in Jewish thought, it's endemic. It's so important in so many areas. The Greeks speak about political philosophy. I'm not going to touch on that today, partly because I know very little about political philosophy and happen not to find it that interesting. But the Greeks talk about political philosophy. The Greeks speak about moral philosophy, ethics in general, hedonism, and the idea of just living a life which is pursued physical pleasure. If you understand that the soul lives in the realm of ideas and those are eternal, if you wish to be an eternal being, you have to actualize your consciousness. You have to become as conceptual as you can, because one day you're not going to inhabit a body, and you're only going to live back in the realm of ideas. And if you are unthinking, how will you live there? What will it mean to live there? Again, sounds very similar to this idea, the Jewish idea of the neshama that somehow survives after death, and we have to prepare the neshama for spiritual existence. We're going to stop here because this is a convenient place to stop our exploration of this. Next Sunday is the week of Shavuos. I'll see if I give a share next Sunday. Otherwise, we'll restart after Shavuos, the next series on Jewish thinkers. And I'm open for nominations as to who we cover. I would like to cover someone very far away from philosophy for next year because we've delved very deeply into philosophy. So I'm going to try and choose a very different type of Jewish thinker. But I am open to suggestions and so on. But I hope that's given you a little bit of a taste of this composite imaginary Jewish figure made up of Neo-Aristotelian or Aristotelian Neo-Platonism and how that impacted on the Jewish world. Yes, Leonard.
Such deep thinkers, and they introduced so many things. Why is it possible? Why is it that the society is referred to like as a hedonistic society when you have such big thinkers and deep thinkers? It seems that the Hamoinam were just like.
So I'll just answer very briefly because we're running out of time. Two points I want to make. The first is we and the Rambam makes this point. We're lucky we had revelation. The Greeks didn't, and in a sense they're trying to arrive at truth through reason. That's an amazing endeavor according to the Rambam. Reason is the great gift we've been given, but the Rambam believes that the revelation trumps it. The second point to make is that hedonism, and by the way, for example, the word Epicurus, which is the word we use for a heretic or in some type of heretic, may be linked to Epicurean. There's different etymologies of the word, but it may be linked to Epicurean. Epicureanism life of just eat, drink, and be merry before tomorrow you die type of philosophy is a little bit of a misquote of what Epicureans really saying. You can see Plato is very profoundly not materialist, but the world of the Greeks is profoundly lively, and there's a range of views there. We haven't touched even remotely on Greek philosophy. There's Stoicism, and there's hedonism, and there's Epicureanism, and there's a range of things. I'm simply speaking about, since this is called Great Thinkers, I'm speaking about an imaginary thinker who is the Aristotle-Plato blend that arrived at the Jewish world via the Arabs, and was very interesting to the Jews. There were other philosophies amongst the Greeks that Jews didn't particularly find that interesting and didn't engage in so much, and therefore that's not the thinkers I choose to speak about today. Okay, we've run out of time, so thank you so much everyone for listening and for joining this series, and I wish you all a good day. Thank you very much.